Hey Nira, I thought this would be easier to for you to see me work through this, and that'd help you a whole lot more with getting into vocal distortion. Um, Grit is unusual in that you're under a lot of pressure when you're trying to create this distortion, so it is easy to overcompress it and get where it hurts in the throat, like you're talking about. So I want you to understand first that there are two types of distortion: the compressed and decompressed. Compressed being through hypertwang or through quack. Think of it that way. You're in a compressed position and pushing through it. The decompressed are all the others, and what like most screams are, what most types of grit are, especially when you're above your passaggio or above your bridge, the break in your voice. So that would be where you're in a better cry position. You're whimpering, you're thinning out the glottis. It's even the phonation, even going, it sits on top of the throat. So that thin glottis, you still have top down resonance. That's super important, but you also need to be thinning out the glottis, and not a sob, not where it's super low. It's this direction. It's like pull back and start to pull up. So it's more like a puppy whimper, and then you're trying to keep that whimper in your voice. That's super, super important for vocal distortion, especially the more bleeding air types or the bleeding the glottis, decompressed types, because that thin position with too much pressure creates distortion. You end up bleeding air through the glottis. So that's really important for you to understand first. We're trying to thin out. We're trying to whimper and get into this nice cry vocal mode or cry position, and what that does to the glottis itself, to the vocal folds. That's where you need to start. Bleeding air grit, I know you're having a problem with the smoker's voice. Hey, hey. You need to work on adding air to the witch's cackle to get that, make it into a light fry. But that's not the only way to do it. You could think, sing, hey, and then try to add the witch's cackle, but don't let go of the singing voice. This is a very difficult coordination to do. Don't beat yourself up over not being able to do it right away. This, hey, I'm singing, and then I cry behind it and try to thin out and try to open up back here. Hey! So I'm still holding resonance in the front of the soft palate. And you need that lifted resonance. You need that up and out feeling of your resonance, of your singing voice that you're adding distortion to. If you can't do it in that range, try another decompressed distortion. Try head voice, like head voice edging grid. I'm having a hard time because I'm not up in a range where I'm used to doing that. And I'm not warmed up at all. So I'm just showing you, you can actually do this not being warmed up. I'm trying to add just a little, not a ton of it. Otherwise, I'm going to scream. Like it puts me right into a scream, and I open up too much, and it becomes more air than it is the phonation. So when you're trying to add grit, focus on keeping that resonance going. Keep your singing voice going. Try it in head voice where there's less musculature involved. See if you can get a feel for that. And then go back to the bleeding air grit. That where you're trying to add that witch's cackle, trying to add that airy piece into it. So it's an airy witch's cackle you're adding to your voice, essentially. You're adding that light fry to your singing voice. If that's not working and the smoker's voice is still too hard to get, hey, where you're on top of your throat, not in it. It's not a pleasant sound. If you can't get that though, so many other ways to approach this. Keep going. Keep going through the other types of distortion. Try out a couple of scream distortions where it's all about falsetto and adding distortion. Because it's relaxing the other muscle groups, and get a feel for where that distortion fits, where it sits, and what technique out of all those different styles of distortion is the easiest for you to create. Try them all out. Go back to the witch's carol. Try to make it airy. Try to ramp that up and add the singing voice to it. You're trying to experiment with, how do I sing and have that witch's cackle area with a little air and have that turned on. It's all about cry. I can't say that. It's all about the whimper. And maybe you'll sound like Chris Cornell at first. I don't know. It's about experimenting with it, getting used to the feeling of it, and then expanding out from there. So try out different distortions, come back to the bleeding air grit, and see if you can do it better after you have a better feel for what a light fry is, or maybe you get the distortion in another type and then can come back to it. Even the compressed distortions, like where I'm up here and then I'm pushing through it instead of crying so much, that can help you get a feel for what distortion is. Because I'm still having to open up and bleed the air a bit, even though I'm technically pushing through quack, I'm having to open the glottis. And that just gives you a feel for opening the glottis. And then go back to and trying to get it airy. Trying to get that after you get a feel for the compressed distortion. So keep trying out different types, different styles of distortion, and find the one that's working for you the best, the one that maybe you got it a couple times and the others you weren't getting it at all. Come back to that, get used to it a little bit more, then try out the ones you actually want to develop. Hope that makes sense. That'll make the bleeding air grit number 2 method a lot more understandable as well, because it's all about a puppy whimper that thins out the glottis, pulls it back, makes it more shallow. Then when you add air to that, it tends to distort. Hope that makes sense.